What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today we are mounting our intercooler and we are fabricating our intercooler piping for our turbo K24 swap Subaru BRZ. Let's do it. So for this phase of the project, the very first thing we need to do is actually get the intercooler mounted in place before we start trying to sort of tackle all of the aluminum tubing, because of the fact that if we make the tubes, assuming where this is going to be, and then we go to mount it and it ends up in a different location, then the tubes aren't going to line up with the intercooler and it's going to be a big problem. So my plan of attack for this, I kind of went back and forth on a bunch of different options. My plan is to try to create some brackets out of aluminum bar. I've got a bunch of aluminum flat stock here. And what we're going to do is we're essentially going to be using some of the bolt holes. Well, they're not even really bolt holes, but some of the holes on the top of this sort of upper radiator brace. And the reason I feel comfortable doing that is because of the fact that it has the long centerpiece that runs down the back that mounts all the way down at the bottom. So this thing is pretty stout and should hold no problem. Now, I do have to sort of figure out where to position it top to bottom. So what I think I'm going to do now is actually get my front bumper, sort of try to toss it in place. Because of the fact that I have quick disconnects over here on the sides, I can put it on and take it off relatively easily. And there is also one other like sort of upper trim piece that's going to go on here. So I want to make sure that we're not interfering with any of the holes that need to actually get used for either mounting the bumper or mounting that top trim piece. But if I use these open ones that don't have any threads, I'm pretty sure I should be fine. So with that in mind, let's see if we can't throw the front bumper on here and just sort of test to see how this is going to look, because of the fact that we got a big fat intercooler up front. We want to kind of show that off. We want it to basically be sort of center stage. So we want to make sure that it's mounted in the right spot. In case I didn't specify, this is a Mishimoto 3-inch M-line universal intercooler. They have a bunch of different sizes and specs and such that you can get, but it has 3-inch inlet and outlet ports. It's a 3-inch thickness. Let's do some test fitting. Okay, so with the bumper sort of partially set on, it's not connected over there. I'm just gonna have a look and see how this intercooler sits. I think height-wise, that looks pretty good. Just have to check the bottom to make sure we're gonna clear everything down here. Okay, so I like the height of where it's currently sitting from an aesthetic standpoint. We've done so many different things, from the valve cover to replacing the fuse box to all of this other stuff that we've done for aesthetic purposes. We're spending all this time, we're spending all this money, we want this stuff to look good, right? So I think I'm happy with sort of where it sits up and down. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to take some measurements for how I'm going to actually mount this thing up in terms of, sort of creating some brackets. That's going to be drilling some holes, bending some of this aluminum flat stock that I've got, welding some pieces together, things like that. So let's pull this bumper back off and talk about how I'm planning to make this work. So I've got 4 6-foot lengths of this 1/8 inch aluminum flat stock. So it's 1/8 thick by 1 inch wide. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to use that to create some brackets that are going to come off of the holes in this upper support that are going to come down and basically give me a spot to use the mounting holes that it has here, one coming off of this side to this mounting port. And the bottom is going to be a little bit more tricky. There's 3 of these different sort of lower supports, if you will. One on the passenger side, there's a center one, which you can see right there, and there's one all the way over on the driver's side. So I don't essentially just want to hang it from the top. I also, I want to have top mounts, and I also want to have kind of a larger, almost like a trellis bracket that'll run underneath and support the bottom, because we don't just want this hanging from the top and sort of shaking around. So that is the plan. So I'm gonna start taking some measurements, and then we're gonna jump over and actually get into cutting to length some of these pieces, and then I'll show you how I kind of intend to bend them into 90-degree pieces. So what I found was, as I was trying to put in this top trim piece right here, normally the bumper will go on first and then this trim piece will go on top and help to essentially hold the bumper in place as such. But as I was holding that in place, a lot of the holes that are in the rad support are covered up by this trim piece. So I was kind of debating, well, I could just drill a hole in the top of this trim piece and it shouldn't be a problem. But then I came down front and I saw this hole. Again, I don't know if you guys are going to be able to see that. Well, anyway, there's a hole right here and there's a hole right here. And when you think about it, when you want this to be supported, because of the fact that this rad upper brace support, whatever the hell it's called, bolts out all the way on the sides, that's where it's going to be the most stable. And so thinking about that, it actually would make the most sense to use the two holes that are right here, because of the fact that they're closest to the actual sort of mounting, grounding kind of a point, if you will. So what I plan to do is actually use these two bolts, create basically just a little L piece where that comes down and then comes forward to the point where it lines up and matches with our bolt holes. And of course, this side is still on an angle like this, but we're gonna base it off of this side and then we'll replicate that over here so that when we mount it up, it's all flush across the top and level. So what I'm gonna do is basically take some of that flat stock and get a piece that's long enough to come straight down and straight out to match up with this here. And then I'm probably gonna have to weld take a single piece that goes all the way across the top like so, just so that it's supported from left to right, and weld it to the bracket, this L piece that's gonna come straight down like so. I think that's the move. I think that's the plan. All right, so what we have here is a 5-inch vise from, of course, place of all places, Harbor Freight. So what we're gonna do is take the piece that we've cut. This is roughly 8.5 inches, and I've measured down about 5.5 inches, because when we get this piece put in here, like so, eventually, you know, we're gonna drill a bolt hole through there, but we need to get this guy bent at a right angle, because once it comes down this way, it needs to come out flat, like so. And then we're gonna weld on a piece that will go horizontal and line up with the top of this mounting position. And we'll drill a hole right there so we can actually get our hardware in there. So what I'm gonna do to bend this at that line is just slip this piece down in the vise, like so. And then I'm just gonna hammer on it. It's literally gonna be that simple. I don't need to go all the way to a flat 90 degrees, because where it mounts up on the top of that radiator support is not a straight angle down, it's actually slightly off, so it's about 75 degree angle, so it's not quite a 90. So we're pretty much just gonna hammer this over until it gets not quite to flat, and we'll see if we need to sort of make any little adjustments there. That's about what we've got. You can kind of see that it's not perfectly a 90 degree angle. It's, from the measurement that I took, it's about, should be about 75-ish degrees. Yeah, this is probably just slightly short of the actual bend that we need, but let's take this piece, set it over here on the car, and see if we actually bent in the right location. So if that were to come straight out, that bend is actually a little bit long. So basically this piece comes down a little bit too far, but fortunately, because of the fact that it comes down too far, all that means is that we can trim some of the top off of this and it'll raise this bend upwards, right? 1/4 inch off the top. I'm just gonna go back to the bandsaw and just like basically shave off this edge, and then we'll come back, test it again, see where it lines up. If I need to cut a little bit more, do that and come back. It's really, this whole process is gonna be very sort of back and forth. Yeah, that is just about right. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna kind of do this whole lineup thing again, and I'm gonna try and take my Sharpie and mark where this bolt hole needs to be drilled on the top of this piece to be able to fit through that hole right there, because we're not really making any contact with the headlight shroud, which is good. I know my head is probably in the way for you guys, but we're gonna mark the absolute center of this hole. There we go. And so now we can drill that hole out, mount it there, and replicate on the other side, and then we're basically just gonna take one big flat piece to go from this edge all the way over to the other edge, and then we'll drill the 2 holes for the mounting positions, and then we can mount the top. All right, so I've got a 5/16 hole drilled in the top of our little L bracket here. That should allow pretty much any M8 size bolt. I'm not gonna use this sort of flat hardware. I'm gonna go get some flange style bolts. But 5/16 hole is wide enough for an M8 size bolt, which is what I was wanting to use for my hardware. So now we're just gonna take our little deburr tool, get that around in here and around on this side a little bit, just to clean up. So now we're gonna take this back over to the car, one final test fit before we essentially try to replicate this for the other side. And that looks just about perfect. And if we take this guy, hold it on there, that should be just about right. So now we're just gonna take this piece that we've now made, try to create as perfect a replica as we can. Okay, so now we have our 2 brackets that are almost identical. There's a because of the fact that I'm hammering these to get the angle right, it's not gonna be perfect. They're not gonna both be exactly 73-degree bends, but you know, it is what it is. So now I'm just gonna take some of that M8 hardware for right now, and I'm just gonna install these in these bolt holes, and we will see what it looks like. And then we're gonna try and connect one long flat piece all the way across. So now, all we're gonna do is pretty much just measure, measure the gap from here to here, and cut one big long piece that's gonna go all the way across. And then we'll end up welding that, and we'll cut off the excess. And then that's gonna be more or less our top mount bracket installed. We could do another piece from sort of up here all the way across, just for more sort of reinforcement. But once we get that first one done, we'll check fitment and see how steady it is. And if we need to weld in an extra piece for reinforcement, we can do that. But then we're gonna jump down to the bottom. So let's measure this top piece, cut it to length, make sure everything kind of lines up, and then we'll get to welding pretty much. So what I ended up doing was not cutting exactly to length, which would have been about 24 inches. I left myself a little bit of overlap, so I cut this about 25 inches. So we have roughly ½ an inch of overlap on each side. And the reason I did that is because of the fact that it's going to allow me to not just butt weld these pieces together, like, run this piece flush with the edge here and like butt weld it, just, holding these 2 pieces. But having it this way and welding, basically doing a lap weld on the sides all the way across, is going to give me a lot more weld material, and I can even come underneath and weld that sort of, I guess that ends up being almost, no, that would be a lap weld. I was gonna say an open corner, but that ends up being a lap weld on the underside as well. So it's basically just gonna give me a lot more weld material to hold these 2 pieces together, as opposed to if I ran this completely flat and butted it up like so, and then welded that seam, it would only give me just that joint for actual, you know, strength, rigidity, and security of the joint. So having it over top like this on both sides basically is going to give it more strength, is going to make sure that it holds in place. So we're going to move some stuff around over here, clean these parts up, get them acetone, some Scotch-Brite pads, get everything clean and ready to go, and then we're going to weld these pieces together. Okay, so now that we've got it just tacked in place, no final welds yet necessarily, but basically this is more or less kind of what we're looking at here. So you just got an L bracket there, an L bracket there. I'm gonna get that welded up. If I need to, I could potentially put an extra one somewhere in the middle here. Pretty happy with the position of this sort of crossbar, but again, we may need to adjust it. It's relatively flimsy, but let's go ahead and get this welded together, and we'll see what we need to do from there. More or less, it should be able to hold just in place, not moving, but I definitely want to complete all of those different spots because of the fact that just to give it more rigidity, basically more location to hold and all that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to center up on this bracket these two mounting holes right here, and do something like this, try and get it as centered as possible, take some marks and drill some holes, and then once we've got the holes drilled, we can pretty much mount it up. So we've got hole drilled. Let's see if they line up. Hopefully they do. They're pretty close, but they're not quite perfect. As you can see, sort of the center of that hole doesn't really quite line up with where that mark is. And then kind of the same over here. So, I mean, that's just kind of how it goes. Even if you have a good like center punch and you drill straight down, sometimes things are going to be off by just a little bit. Okay, so I got this hole widened out a bit. It's not the prettiest thing I've ever made, but basically I just took a Dremel with a carbide bit and worked this hole over. And so it's more of a slot now than just a straight hole, but that's fine. Any M8 bolt should hold just fine, especially if you have a washer or if you're using like a flange style bolt, which is what I intend to use. And there we go. That is looking pretty solid, pretty much flat all the way across, sort of measuring some tolerances from the top of this plate to our AC condenser, and the tolerance is just about the same there. Yeah, you can see these bolts are a little long. Yeah, I'm gonna have to go either cut these bolts down and use these, or go get some flange style bolts, which is kind of what I originally had intended to use. But yeah, we're not touching up anywhere on here, and we're gonna, we're about to fabricate an entire sort of underneath support to prevent any additional movement, which this currently has, as you can see. But once we're mounted down low, it shouldn't really be able to move front to back at all. And this doesn't really seem to have any sag because of how far out these bolts are mounted. If they were like right in the middle, this could potentially like droop, because aluminum is a lot softer than steel, but because of the fact of how far out they're mounted on each side, I think that's going to be just fine. Let's try to figure out how we're going to do the lower section. So what I elected to do here was essentially have one long beam connecting all the way from the passenger side, sort of standoff underneath the subframe, or connected to the subframe really. Through the middle one, I went ahead and drilled the 2 bolt holes and mounted those up, and one all the way over here on the driver's side. Sorry if I'm not getting great angles here. I'm holding the camera like crazy. But But so what I'm going to need to do is actually to get some pieces that will connect to this and actually come back to this bolt hole right here. See if we can focus, maybe zoom a little bit. Yeah. So I'm trying to use this little bolt hole, but obviously this straight piece doesn't connect to there. So I'm going to have to weld on some 90-degree angle pieces that will connect this beam to this bolt hole. And then the same on the other side. And then from there, we're just going to weld on a couple of straight pieces that will go from this long connecting horizontal bar over to the mounting point here and the mounting point here. So straight piece from here off to the mount, straight piece from here off to the mount, and then straight piece and straight piece there. And then that should more or less conclude our lower mount. All right, so we got this initial lower bracket done. You can see it's bolted up right here in the center. And then we've got the little extra kick out towards the passenger side as well as the driver side. And obviously I'm gonna come back and cut off a lot of this excess that I don't really need, and I'll, file it down and make it look all nice. In addition to these little edges, the ends here, I'll also cut off and sand down and make them look all pretty. And so the last thing we need to do is make a kick out here to the mounting point and here somewhere to the mounting point. And then that will be the intercooler mounted. And that is pretty much a job finished. Obviously, I'm still going to come back through and clean up a lot of this stuff. I'm going to cut this edge off or maybe round this over, and the same for these tabs where it comes up into the top and it's still a harsh edge. But that's the top. Let me see if I can get y'all a decent angle of what the bottom one looks like. Now that we've got the central support here that runs all the way across, we created these little kickouts for the actual mounting position on the intercooler. And you can see that those kickouts do have a very slight bend in them. It's about maybe about a 15-degree angle. But I found that if I was going to leave them flat, it just wasn't going to mate up with that mounting surface quite right. So I did have to put a little bit of a bend in each one of those. And again, I just did that by hammering it until it looked about right. So now that that's done, let's have a little shake test. Because previously, before I did the bottom one, when it was only mounted at the top, it would sway a decent amount. But we've got good clearance from, this was this little black tab, the little eyelet right there, that's part of the AC condenser mount. I wanted to make sure that I cleared that. And again, it's a little bit hard for you guys to be able to tell, but there's plenty of space in between this little mount and the back side of the intercooler here. So that's all good. We've got plenty of space clearance up front for the splitter mount. And this guy, I don't know if you can see how much I'm shaking that, but it's not wobbling at the top. It's definitely not wobbling at the bottom. I'd say if anything, it's more secure on the bottom than it is on the top, but yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. So only thing left to do is just a little maintenance work, clean up the edges, maybe paint it, but really once you put the bumper on, the front bumper comes all the way up to this front sort of cross member. It's not really the cross member, but all the way up to this radiator support and covers everything below this. So I don't really need to paint this, but just for my own, just for kicks, I might just spray it black. But intercooler is done. And that's gonna wrap it up for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for following the build. The intercooler is now mounted up so we can focus on taking our tubes, test fitting, cutting, getting everything set up to feed the intercooler, as well as come out and feed our intake manifold. We are getting so close to being done. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up down below, subscribe to the channel so you can stay up to date, and until next time, build your dreams.